Thank you so much for coming to our celebration of Leah Lakshmi Piepzna-Samarasinha's book, Care Work, Dreaming Disability Justice. After Leah's reading, Cyree Jarelle Johnson will join Leah for a moderated conversation. We're so grateful to have them both here tonight. Cyree Jarelle Johnson is a poet and writer from Piscataway, New Jersey. Slingshot, their first book of poetry, will be published by Nightboat Books in 2019. Yay! Congratulations. Cyree has been featured in the New York Times, PBS NewsHour, WUSI, the Philadelphia Trans Health Conference, Mashable, the Whitney Museum of American Art, the White House, and many, many other places. You can find them at social media at Cyree Jarelle or at CyreeJarelleJohnson.com. Please give Cyree a healthy round of applause.
I prefer my round of applause is sick. Oh, God. So I am here to introduce my friend and one of my big life inspirations, Leah Lakshmi Piepzna-Samarasinha, who is a queer disabled femme writer, organizer, performance artist, educator of Burgher, Tamil, Sri Lankan, and Irish Roma ascent, as you all well know. The author of Care Work, Dreaming Disability Justice, which we are here to celebrate today. Dirty River, a queer femme of color dreaming her way home, which was awarded the ALA Above the Rainbow list, shortlisted for the Lambda and Publishing Triangle Awards. Body Map, which was shortlisted for the Publishing Triangle Award. Love Cake, Lambda Literary Award winner, and Consensual Genocide. With Chingy Chen and Jay Dulani, she co-edited The Revolution Starts at Home, Confronting Intimate Violence in Activist Communities. Leah's next two books, Tonguebreaker and Exploring Transformative Justice, A Reader, co-edited with Jairus Dixon, are forthcoming in 2019, so look out for that. A lead artist with disability justice performance collected Sin Zimbalid since 2009, Leah's writing has been widely anthologized and published, with recent work featured in PBS NewsHour, Poets.org, Poetry in the Body Folio, The Deaf Poet Society, Bitch, Self, Truth Out, and The Body Is Not an Apology. Her essays have appeared in Glitter and Grit. Oh, wait for it though, y'all. Octavia's Brood, Dear Sister, Undoing Border Imperialism, Stay Solid, Persistent, Still Butch and Femme, Yes Means Yes, Visible, A Femthology, Homelands, Colonize This, quintessential masterpiece. I know y'all are still reading it. We Don't Need Another Wave, Bitch Fest, Without a Net, Dangerous Families, Brazen Femme, and A Girl's Guide to Taking Over the World. From 2006 to 2015, Leah co-founded and co-directed Mangoes with Chili, a groundbreaking queer and trans people of color performance tour and collective. She co-founded Toronto's Asian Arts Freedom School in 2006. She is a Vona Fellow and holds an MFA from Mills College. She is also a Rust Belt poet, a Sri Lankan with a white mom, a femme over 40, a grassroots intellectual, a survivor who is hard to kill, and of course, let's never forget the author of the Femme Shark Manifesto. Let's welcome to the stage Leah Lakshmi Piepzna-Samarasinha.
Please give it up for the one and only indubitable Cyree Jarelle Johnson. Also, hi, this is so lovely. Thank you all for being here. I don't even know what day it is. I wrote an essay in a Facebook note today where I was like, I think that people were like, well, you're not really disabled because you go on these tours. And I was just like, I just spent all day in my underwear, just kind of like staring into space. And honestly, if this was going to be like, not that this isn't authentic, but I'm just like, I really kind of want to be up here in like the sweatpants with the toothpaste smear, which is kind of and like the hair and stuff like that. And I might actually go ahead and do that next time I do stuff. I'm so happy for everybody who made it here through inaccessible transit and no spoons and exhaustion and pain and all of the terrible, horrible of this world. And I also want to, the live stream's going? Live stream's going. Okay, cool. So if people are joining us on live stream, thank you all for being here too. I was thinking a lot about what I wanted to bring to this space today, and that long ass bio, there was not, I left out some stuff, which is that I came here as a full scholarship kid to NYU in 1993, really different time. And I was really crazy and hallucinated my whole first year on the N train. And I was really sick. And, there's at least one person here who remember those days. Hi. I love you too. I'm so glad you're here. And I just was thinking about, the words of the great disabled queer poet Laura Hershey in one of her last poems, translating the Crip, where she says, here we are, thriving and unwelcome in this, the only space and time. And I just think about all of us and everyone who's watching us from bed and everyone who's not here who's thriving and unwelcome. And about the specific ways, every place you go, people are like, okay, the access is really bad. I'm like, the access is really bad everywhere. And New York, as I don't have to tell you, is a special form of hell on earth. So I just think about, and there's a way in which disability is both hypervisible and invisibilized at the same time. We're always pointed at, and then people are like, you don't really exist. And I think there's a way that this city, that kind of blends with all of us, where it's just we're all here and we're all hyper feeling the lack of access and all of the holes and the limits in terms of disability community and social justice community that gets disability justice, and we're also here making our way. So does that make sense? Okay. They were 20 minutes, and I was like, I'm autistic, and I go up here and I talk a lot, and sometimes it's an hour and a half, and people were just crying and shit, but I'm gonna try and keep it to 20 minutes and just be focused. I don't know how it's gonna go. Yeah, so what I want to say too is that, I wasn't kidding about the sweatpants, and I feel like when you hear that whole long list, I feel complicated about it because I'm really proud of the stuff I've done and the work I've put in, and I also really want to say that there were and will be many years where I was a fuck up who was not being a productive, socially capital person at all. And all of our abilities to make and do anything as sick and disabled and neurodivergent and deaf and mad, black and brown folks and white folks and queer folks and trans folks, it's not possible unless there's actually the container of radical disability justice culture. I didn't write about my disability for 31 years. Body Map came out 3 years ago. That was my third book of poetry. That was the first one where I mentioned, oh yeah, I have this weird thing. I don't really talk about it. And that would not have been possible without the labor of Patty Byrne, Leroy Moore, Mia Mingus, Eli Clare, Sebastian Margaret, and also Billy Rains, Cyree Jarelle, Tina, all of these people, all of y'all, so many people in this room who, Tourmaline, so many people who've been breaking silence about sickness and disability from an intersectional perspective that looks at our ancestors, looks at environmental racism, looks at colonization, and also looks at the future, right? And that's something I try and hold on to. I don't know, people were like, you're weirdly optimistic for a sarcastic, depressed person. And I'm like, yeah, I know, I don't know what the thing is. It's I just feel like my childhood was so fucked up, everything's uphill from there. So I'm like, great, I'm not at my parents' house. This is awesome. But I will say, one of the things about bringing this book into the world, two things, I'll say this and then another, and then I'll read stuff, is that, we're on year 2 of Trump, and it's not like we have not been surviving the end of the world for forever, but, it's been a special kind of apocalypse. And I know that for me, I would say that again, but we just all get more depressed than we already are. I've had a really hard time reaching for the future that I want in the last 2 years because I feel like so many of us, we're just fighting to maintain the bare minimum that's completely inadequate that we already have, right? You look at all of the AAWW and not dead yet protesters fighting to keep Medicaid and the ACA and the ADA, and those are already inadequate. There's already, I can't get Medicaid, my friends can't get Medicaid, some of them can, some of them can't. We, some of y'all in here may be familiar with the disability justice, being we love the ADA, we're grateful. Also, what if you can't sue? What if you're not a citizen? What if you believe that this is just a settler colonial hallucination that we're in? It's both and. But having said that, it feels like this is the only time Unwelcome and Thriving to release a book that's trying to really hard to dream a future where we win and there's a decolonial disabled future, right? Where we're not just tolerated, we're at the center. I'm wearing this already fading ass Teespring shirt that says the future is accessible. You can stare at my tits, it's fine, it's consensual. It was really cool at the Disability and Intersectionality Summit in Boston because there was 12 people all the same shirt, and we were like, yeah. And I was like, wow, yeah, imagine a future without stairs. Imagine a future without toxic waste. Imagine a future with reparations. Imagine a future with no medical fucking torture. Imagine a future where you get your wheelchair as soon as you need it. Imagine a future where your rheumatologist doesn't make fun of you. Right? You know, imagine a future with like mainstream, like everybody ASL, like in thriving deaf communities. Like imagine a future where autistic people are valued, whether we are, where the words high and low functioning don't exist. Right? Like I want to imagine that future. And should I read some pieces from this thing? Yeah, okay, cool. I'm probably at 10 minutes already. Okay, so the other thing was that people were like, yeah, the time's really ripe for a disability justice book, and we'll publish it, you know, if you can be like the leader of the movement. And I was like, fuck you, no. And I was like, that's not gonna fucking work. And I'm just like, this is a bunch of weirdos that nobody else gives a shit about, but we give a shit about each other. And so I also was very, very conscious of myself as an ambulatory light-skinned person, and I was just like, no. However, it was a trip looking for the blurbs where I was like, oh, all the disabled black and brown folks self-publish. Yeah, because you know when you look for blurbs, they want you to get somebody who's more published than you. And it was like white disabled people, often in academia. And I was like, oh my God, this is where we are. And I forgot to put the cards up, but I'm very happy that this book is out there with Aurora Levins-Morales' book, with Leroy Moore's new book, and like new books, plural, with Alice Wong's Resistance and Hope, which is an incredible anthology with people in the room of like disabled, mostly POC, writing about resistance that you can get for free on Smashwords, $5 on Amazon. And I just want us all to keep writing and producing, you know, in all of our wild disability dreams and visions as black and brown people and as intersectional people, because I don't want to be a fucking star. I want to be part of the fucking universe that I'm already a part of. Okay. So I'm going to start out by reading a quote from my really good friend, Stacey Milburn, disabled, Korean, queer, femme. Actually, I'm not sure if they identify as femme anymore, but like badass, wonderful activist and writer. Who I'm kind of like lovingly like being like, you need to write a book, boo, because all these Facebook posts, you know, everyone's like, Stacey. Okay, so just breathe this one in. I have loved disabled people of color my whole adult life, and I am still amazed to discover that the more I love our people, the more I remember where I come from. I remember that my ancestors found each other out, seeing each other in the unseen. My ancestors knew that asking after one another and making sure that people had what they need, what we might today understand as collective access, was the only way to be together. Together, the best shot at staying alive. My ancestors knew the power of vulnerability and how to hold each other in dignity. My ancestors knew joy. My ancestors made mistakes and meditated on who they wanted to be in community. My ancestors became those people. You can clap, you can not clap, it's all good. Yeah, you know? Yeah. So this is a brief excerpt from the preface, which is called Writing with a Movement from Bed. When I moved to Oakland in 2007, I started writing from bed. I mean, I'd already been doing it, but I started having a name for it. I wrote in old sleep pants, lying on a heating pad during the hours I spent in my big, sick and disabled femme of color bed cave, and I wasn't alone. I did so alongside many, many other sick and disabled writers making culture, because writing from bed is a time-honored disabled way of being a cultural worker, one the mainstream doesn't mostly acknowledge, but whose lineage stretches from Frida Kahlo painting her corset in bed to Grace Lee Boggs writing revolutionary Asian American Detroit miracles in her wheelchair at age 98. I had very good timing. I moved to Oakland just as disability justice was birthing ourselves as a movement. Disability justice is a term coined by the Black, brown, queer, and trans and working class white members of the original Disability Justice Collective, founded in 2005 by Patty Byrne, Mia Mingus, Leroy Moore, Eli Clare, and Sebastian Margaret. They dreamed up a movement-building framework that would center the lives, needs, and strategies of disabled queer and trans and/or black and brown folks, marginalized both from mainstream disability rights organizing's white-dominated single-issue focus and the ableism of most of our black and brown social justice movements. Sins Invalid, the performance collective co-created by Patty and Leroy, was shaking things up with its large-scale, beautifully produced performances about our sex, bodies, struggles, its use of a culture as a weapon to reshape people's dreams, nightmares, and future visions of what our liberation could look like. The writings of writers like Mia Mingus, Stacey Milburn, Aurora Levins Morales, and Billy Rain were being passed around from hand to hand in communities I was a part of. I was reading them over and over again silently in my room, my brain breaking open. I'd never seen disabled, queer, and trans, Black, Indigenous, and people of color writing about the nitty-gritty of our lives before without apology. We were finding ourselves and finding each other and making space that held our desires and stories online, in conversations in corners, outside of the elevator in BART. It even felt like some non-disabled people were paying attention, being forced to deal with ableism and with us, whether or not they were thrilled about it. And as we were giving birth to ourselves, I got to be part of it as a cultural worker working for BED. As I was able to perform with Sins Invalid, that experience refused to stay in one little corner of my life. I wanted every single cutie BIPOC cultural space I took part in to be that accessible, that whole. I wrote pieces about cross-disability access that were tools that we used to help create the first Creating Collective Access Network, an experiment in access made by and for sick and disabled cutie BIPOC people at the 2010 Allied Media Conference that broke away from the traditional format of access as service begrudgingly offered, if at all, to disabled people by non-disabled people who feel grumpy about it, to access as a collective joy and offering that as disabled Black and brown folks we can gift to each other. Finding other creators and building with them made me write about what it was like to create performing art spaces where access was a central part of the performance, not an afterthought. As queers and femmes in my communities, particularly queer femmes of color and multiply marginalized femmes, continued to kill themselves, I wrote about suicidality as an ever-present reality in our communities and in my life. And this is a big deal. Because when I got sick in 1997, nobody in my anti-racist, anti-police brutality, Black and brown community talked about illness. When I got sick and I couldn't mail out 200 letters, I got a snorting like, oh, you're really sick? And people didn't call me back. Before I ran into Sins, like many other people I knew, I thought of disability as something that you weren't allowed to talk or write about in our cultures. Nowhere in the cutie BIPOC politicized spoken word communities I was a part of, or wanted to be cool enough to be part of, in the early 2000s, do I remember anyone doing poetry about disability? I mean, come on. Do you remember any poems about disability justice in Def Poetry Jam? You may not remember Def Poetry Jam. I'm old. It's okay. I know you remember Def Poetry Jam. And none of this happened because able-bodied people decided to be nice to the cripples. It happened because we turned towards each other. And we turned towards each other in ways that looked very different than the traditional activism that we had been pushed out of. It looked like Tumblr and blog and social media posts, or like 3 people getting together as a kitchen table or a group Skype call to start to hesitantly talk through thoughts about activism and survival, about our lives, organize a meal train, share pills, or post the thoughts about survival we have at 2 a.m. Our work is underdocumented, private work often seen as not real activism, but it is the realest activism there is. This is how disability justice, art, and activism change the world and save lives. These pieces are a small part of them. How am I doing for time? Thank you. Thank you. And I'm a terrible person because the first piece is like a 50-page essay, but it's in like 17 segments. And I'm just going to read a little bit at the beginning. And it's called Care Web's Experiments in Creating Collective Access. Do you have the car today? Hayati, I'm at the bus stop. I hurt so bad. Can you pick me up? Can I borrow $20? Can you go buy groceries for me when you're out and drop them off? Here's a list. You want to go to community acupuncture together? I've got the car today. Hey, B needs more care shifters. Can you repost the Facebook note? Can we share the Access van ride over to the city? If you come, you can say you're my PCA and you won't have to pay. Do you have any anemone tincture you could bring over? I'm flaring. Holding me would be good too. If I take your manual wheelchair and load it up with takeout, we'll all have food even though you can't walk all the way over there. Can you go with me to the clinic and take notes while I talk to that asshole doctor? Can I use the address for the easy desert pickup? I'm just over the border into Oakland from Berkeley. Let's pass the hat so we can afford ASL. Do you have the interpreter list? Here's the list of accessible event spaces we made up on Google Docs. Can you be part of my Mad Map? Want to Skype if you can't get out, even if we live 2 blocks away from each other? Want to go with me to the food stamp office? Can you pick up an eighth for me when you go to the dispensary? Collective access and care webs have been happening for a really long time. But I ask, what does it mean to shift our ideas of access and care, whether it's disability, childcare, economic access, or more? From an individual chore, an unfortunate cost of having an unfortunate body, to a collective responsibility that's maybe even deeply joyful. How does it change our lived experiences of disability and chronic illness? What does it mean to wrestle with these ideas of softness and strength, vulnerability, pride, asking for help and not, all of which are so deeply raced and classed and gendered? If collective access is revolutionary love without charity, how do we learn how to love each other? How do we keep loving each other after we learn that we don't know how to love each other yet? How do we learn to do this love work of collective care that lifts us up instead of abandons us, that grapples with all the deep ways in which care is so much more complicated than just call me if you need something? And I'm just going to read 2 more segments. Oh yeah, this is called The Crip Art of Failure based on real life events. Hi, welcome. What's that? Huh? Oh, no, not at all. No, fuck that person. They're horrible. No, I know. No. That's why. Yeah, no. You're welcome. No, a lot of this book was written with a lot of Central Massachusetts sarcasm that I really hope people pick up on, and I think most people will. Okay, am I out of time yet? No? Okay, great. Recently on a conference call, a completely well-meaning able-bodied person who was trying to hire me asked, okay, we're really excited to have you. We just have one question. Okay, what is disability justice? Like, how will we know when we're doing it? Thank you for laughing. I really needed this job. I was so glad we weren't on Zoom, just on a phone call so they couldn't see my face. I said something diplomatic and positive, and in my head, I was like, oh, you want to know how you're going to know if you're doing disability justice? You're going to know you're doing it because people will show up 4 hours late, someone will vomit, someone else will have a panic attack, someone will vomit and have a panic attack. Nothing will happen on time, ever. The ramp on the supposedly accessible building will be broken and no one will be surprised. You're not going to meet your benchmarks on time or ever. Also, we won't be grateful to be included. We will want to set the agenda. And what our leadership will look like might look like changing an ostomy bag in the middle of a meeting. Being really nuts, not just once in a while, but every day. It's slow. It's people that even the most well-meaning social justice abled person stares at or gets freaked out by or just thinks is a little depressing. Disability justice looks like what many mainstream people have been taught to think of as failure. Disability justice, when it's really happening, is too wild and messy to fit into traditional movement, nonprofit, industrial structures because our bodies and minds have always been too wild to fit into those structures, and that's on purpose because the nonprofit industrial complex was invented to manage dissent, and it was based on what people don't talk about, including a lot of able feminists of color, the model of charities, which were invented to lock us up and make a lot of money on us during colonialism as disabled people. That's why nonprofits never give disabled Black and brown folks money to run anything because they need us as clients and we're not competent. And it's so easy at this moment in history for very well-meaning people to look at a list of disability justice principles and go, yeah, that sounds good, and put "we're against ableism" on their list. But the real deal is messy and beautiful as our body minds. And it is always something that I can't really get across in a soundbite, but I will try for you. It's more like disability justice is you and your friend are really, really stressed out about Trump. So you decide to plan a performance art show about how our disabled Black and brown ancestors survived fascism, because they did. Your friend has a traumatic brain injury and dealing with forms and email does not work for them, but you're autistic in a certain way, so you write a successful grant to the City Arts Commission in 3 hours with your hyper-focus. You, however, get completely overwhelmed and aphasic if more than one person talks to you at once, so you're sitting in a corner freaking out right before the show while they blissfully, with their Leo chillness, it's like, oh, you need $45 worth of props? No problem. Oh, it's 30 minutes long, not 10? Great. And the show goes on. The gay theater staff is well-meaning, but they're completely overwhelmed, so they do absolutely nothing, they promise, and you have to produce, direct, fundraise, and perform. Every single artist is interested, but it's like herding cats to get them to write you back. But when you talk to them, they're like, no one's ever asked me to be in a sick and disabled cutie BIPOC show before. Am I really an artist? Do I really get to say all that crazy shit on stage? Your co-coordinator has a really hard time getting the ASL interpreters to write back, and then when they do, books them for all 4 nights. When you get the bill, it's 3 times as high as you budgeted for because the agency refused to give you a quote. The live stream dives halfway through because your computer's old and someone gets really mad and tweets about how you're letting the community down. You are emceeing 2 minutes after blowing an ovarian cyst. However, you have a community where you can be real about that and not pretend, and they actually send you love and Reiki and stuff like that. And the show goes on. And at the end, despite or because of it all, you and your friends still love each other. Everyone says that the show helped them get through January. And when you are $1,200 short on the ASL, a former disability justice collective that went bust due to so much internal drama, gives you the rest of the money in their account that they don't know what to do with, and a community member who's an elder wins a huge settlement against SSDI by showing up at the office every day for 3 months and says, kid, meet me at the ATM, and gives you $250 in 20s and 10s because you kept them housed when they were in the nursing home and they couldn't pay the rent by passing the hat at last year's show. Disability is a set of innovative, virtuosic skills. Thanks. Okay. Okay, I might end on more of a thing than a woo thing, but I think, we can handle it. And, I don't know, everyone's always like, your thing is that, like, you just make people cry for 2 hours and you swear. And I was like, yeah, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. Yeah, it's my specialty. And, like, they're like, you wear those sparkles. And I'm like, it's all the same $7.99 skirt from H&M. I got, like, 6 of them, it's like the uniform. It's great. So me and Stacy wrote this piece called, do I want to read this piece? Okay. Well, okay, I will say that, I'm a survivor, and Survivorhood is normal, and there's a lot of survivors in the room, and, we're in the middle of, a mass apocalyptic breaking open of survivor stories that is not new, and it is new, and it's this moment in time, and I just want to honor that. So, I wrote this piece that, man, I had to really fucking fight because I had a really fucked up copy editor who was just like, I don't understand what you're talking about anything. And I was like, yeah, do you think people understand what ableism is? And I was just like, it's like the death rattle. But I wanted to write this, I was just like, I want to write this piece about how traditional ways of thinking about survivorhood are rooted in ableism. And it's like a master's thesis, or not a master's thesis because fuck the master, but I was just like, yeah, it's like the grand unified theory of everything. Yeah, this is also a disability justice thing where someone's like, you're so successful in gayness. And I'm like, I just look like another nutcase in sweatpants who just can't get their life together, who's having a lot of ideas, and that's who I am. And somehow it's worked out, enough. So thank you. Long story short, I just, basically the gist of it, I was like, as a survivor, I think we have a lot of trauma and we want less pain. And then the models that are out there are cured and fixed or broken, right? So then we still have stuff that comes up. I've seen so many survivors being like, I'm not surviving right, and I feel so much despair because I'm still triggered, I'm still sad, I'm still learning new stuff about my survivorhood. And the only model up there is and it's even in, I talk a lot of shit about the courage to heal, but I just do, where they're just like, eventually, the trauma passes away and you get married and it's just chill and you live in Santa Cruz and you're white and it's fine. And you only got raped the one time and that was it. And it's cool and nothing bad happens. And I'm like, that's not really my experience of, it's like a fucking decathlon of bullshit, So basically, I just was like, yeah, cure is bullshit. What does it mean to actually take disability justice thinking and anti-ableist thinking and be like, what if I'm still about fucked up but living a really great life? So this is a section called Old Bitch Survivors Who Cry and Laugh. As a young survivor, I read a lot of survivor writing, the feminists of color, slam poetry, satire, Dorothy Allison kind. And what I picked up on was telling the raw truth could heal you even if it was too much for most people. Running away could heal you. Cutting off somebody's dick or hand could heal you. Lorena Bobbitt was really in the news as I graduated from high school. Sex could heal you, and not having sex could heal you, and solitude and a closed door. But what I didn't see much of was stories of what came after. What long-term survivorhood looked like after you've been trying to have the courage to heal for a while. And I wanted an option besides normality or suicide. And it would have meant a lot to me if I'd seen stories and pictures of middle-aged or older survivors who were happy and yet not done. who were a lot less triggered than we used to be, but they still snapped to their partner, froze up when they got touched a certain way, had a great month and then a panic attack year, and then just had to get the fuck out of town for a while, who were successful on their own terms, but continued to still have a few deeply shitty mental health times a year, who had chosen queer family that was wonderful, the best, and then completely fell the fuck apart in a disastrous way that you never would have expected, but actually seemed completely obvious after the fact. We're all here. Everyone's like, when you gonna write the second memoir? And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, Dorothy Allison, she's like, it's been 20 years since Cave Dweller because I gotta wait for some people to die. I don't know. I'm trying not to die. And I'm like, yep. This is why people get into fiction. But, anyway. Who thought they knew everything about their abuse story, but then woke up one day at 42 and thought, shit, maybe my mom also abused my older cousin, who she also had a special closeness to. Or what if I'm not just grateful to be free, but deeply angry and sad that I don't have a mom? There's still not enough of those stories, and I want to have the ones where I'm 43 and life is good and life is fucked up and I still feel sad and I still feel angry and I'm still crazy and I have a lot of tools and I have the Ativan prayer, counseling, DBT cards in my purse, weed, tinctures and crystals enough to kill somebody. And I want to say I'm not a super survivor or a super Crip. I am a Crip survivor with superpowers who has joy and sadness, rage and loneliness, grief and rediscovery. And I don't want to be fixed if being fixed means being bleached of memory, untaught by what I have learned through this miracle of survivorhood. My survivorhood is not an individual problem, it is a collective problem, and I want the communion of all of us who have survived and all of our knowledge. I don't want to be fixed, I want to change the world. I want to be alive, awake, grieving, and full of joy, and deeply weird, and I am. Thanks. I'm gonna do a last quick thing. Is that okay? Yeah, nobody's like, get the fuck off the stage, bitch. What the fuck? We wanna watch This Is Us, come on. Like, what the hell is this shit? No, we really don't wanna watch This Is Us. It's really, there's a lot of shit in here. I don't know. I also want to say that one disability, there's a million disability art and aesthetic paradigms, and some of them are that, like my friend Neve's like, Crip years are like dog years, like you got to get it in. And I see so much, Cyree, you've talked about this online where you were like, sometimes when our disabled experience means being close to death, and I don't mean this, and I know you don't mean either, but like I think some people think, oh yeah, like when you have cancer, every day is a blessing, and it's like, But it's more like our closeness to death in reality means that we don't fuck around. And, we're already marginalized, and that really hurts, and that's oppression, but we also have the option of being real, right? So if I can find it, me and Stacey had an interview called Crip Lineages, Crip Futures. And I just want to say something about disabled wealth, which is a concept that I came up with. We really went in. Yeah. What does Crip wealth mean to you? I always go to Crip kindness. Crip kindness is the wealth where we notice each other's pain face and offer a chair. Ask in a low-key way, not a big deal if we can help with a service task. Sit without speaking, and it's totally okay. Drop a bottle of tincture next to someone having a panic attack. Raise thousands of dollars for someone to buy an accessible van or mail a stranger an extra prescription or inhaler. It's collective noticing and collective hustle. It's witnessing each other without trying to fix each other. It's being allowed to relax, expand, just be. It's also not automatic, which is a place where I want to give respect to and deepen Mia Mingus's idea of access intimacy. Like many, many other sick and disabled queers, Mia's well-known essay, Access Intimacy, has been foundational in my disability justice knowledge. And it's naming the experience of Crip on Crip understanding of each other's access needs as a place of love and communion. But sometimes some of that essay can read to me like understanding each other's access needs is an automatic and magical process, and I want to push back on that and say that while access intimacy is often a sophisticated disabled gift, and we are magic and make magic, I also want to argue for access intimacy as a process and a learnable skill. I think it's dangerous when we believe that as disabled folks, we always just know each other's needs. I want us to acknowledge the ways that disabled people do have ways of knowing each other's stuff, and how we also need to not assume and ask each other. I also think it's very important to state that able people can and do commit to learning access intimacy, because otherwise we'll be stuck in this place where Crips are still the only ones who can do for us. I want everyone to have disabled knowledge. I want everyone to be able to show up. But Crip wealth is also the gift of us being the normal, the regular, the gift of, yes, you can live in your sweatpants, you can change your bag in front of me, you can be really, really, really weird. The amount of time it takes you to transfer onto the toilet is completely regular. I see so many able people running into disability or madness and illness and being so completely flummoxed by all of this because of the ableist shame that everyone swims in is so deep. And I wonder what they would be like if they even know this word of disabled wealth, if they ever even knew that there were all of us waiting here with our encyclopedia of knowledge and resources, with our dueling, with our ways that we have brought ourselves and each other to the other side and the other side and the other side again of new and old disability over and over again. If they knew that we are the seed bank, the promise, the gift that we give to each other, if they said thank you, what would be the possibilities that would be so much richer for all of us? Okay, I'm gonna stop there. Thank you so much. But that's not it. Now, me and Cyree, with our coordinated fans, are gonna it's gonna be a talk show. You're not ready. This is gonna be a fucking talk show. And we're gonna have this shit. And then you guys get to ask us questions. Okay, so, yeah.
Oh goodness. So now that I'm done like trying to keep my mascara from running, and now that this fan has me feeling like I'm at church, which a good church fan will do, I'm really wondering, you said a lot about survivorship, and I'm wondering what you think, other than the courage to heal, which I think many of us have some familiarity with, is the root of the idea that like eventually one will get over, right, such a problematic framework of the trauma, we'll get past it. What is that? And how do you feel like it mirrors other disability paradigms, right? Like where like you'll either die or like your sickness will like get better, like you'll be able to navigate the world better. Like how do you...
I took the pill. Wow, it's
right,
great. Yeah.
Right. How do you think that that was formed and what do you think it means for our lives?
I don't know. You know, like... I might start saying some real weird shit. Like, you know, on the first day, there was this anyway, I have a weird sense of humor. Those are really big, good questions. I don't know if I'm going to have the full answer. I do think that one part of the paradigm is that, I mean, I just think back to what I know about, like, second wave feminist, like, survivorhood culture and, like, you know, culture making, rape crisis, like, all of these things. And you know, you have this whole wave of people breaking silence in a certain way in the 1970s and 80s, you know, in North America and also globally. And then you have this collective, oh shit, everybody's a survivor. Wow, this is normal. And then you have like a wave that, I mean, I was born in 75, but I wasn't really around for that part in a, you know, conscious adult way. But I think that to me, sometimes I'm like, okay, you know, I think about what it's like at different moments in the last couple years of Me Too, where, you know, my feed where I want to go to escape and find community is just like story. And I'm so glad they're there, but I'm just like, it's trigger ping pong.
Yes.
You know, and I just can imagine all these people in like, you know, 1974, 1975, 1981 being like, wow, we're all survivors, and this enormous ocean of grief and pain and rage and neurodivergence and, you know, complex trauma, and people being like, we want an ending to it. Mm-hmm. And I think as human beings a lot of the time, and I think that like to me, you know, in ways I might not be able to explain right now, I think that there's a root of ableism in this where we want some neat and pretty and quick answers. And I think one part, I mean, pain sucks, you know, and we all get to have our different relationships to pain. And then at the same time, as sick and disabled folks, often we're like, pain is different when you're, you know, like a lifetime achiever at it. You know, like it's, you know, I mean, it's different when an able person gets the flu and it's like the world is ending versus you're like, well, I'm on year 21 of the flu. So, you know, how is it this week? You get different skills around it. So I feel like, you know, I would wager that it's one part, can this shit be over? You know, like, can we have an end date to it? You know, can things actually get better? And I have a lot of compassion for people who, from what I know of like feminist survivorhood and like rape crisis and health movements in the 70s, were just like, I mean, some of the things that I think are really strong where they're like, we're the experts, we're gonna make it up. Yes. Like it was before professionalization. Mm-hmm. But then at the same time, people were like, I don't know, like, when does this end? What if we just feel fucked up forever? Like, this is, how the hell are we going to do this? And then I think also you see where professionalization and, like, you know, white, cis, middle class, like, professionalization of, like, let's work with the law, let's get money from the state, like, let's have people with MSWs work in the shelter, you know, things like that. You get this kind of, I mean, I actually got very daring, and I think I coined the phrase survivor industrial complex in that piece, where I was like, yeah, it's that, there's some people being like, oh shit, where I'm like, and I mean, I worked as a crisis line worker for a decade. You know, I'm not harshing on anyone who works in, you know, intimate and sexual violence and survivor nonprofits. Like, you know, we're all really good people trying to fucking be the one great crisis center for a huge metropolitan area. But there are ways that the professionalization and what a lot of Black and brown feminists have called out, where they're like, okay, so you make it a crime, cool, but then those laws get used against Black, Indigenous, POC, trans, sex working, et cetera, disabled people. You know, it's similar the ways in which when you just kind of make survivorhood be something that you go and you get a certificate in, and it's like, here's the steps, you know, and it's over at a certain point. You know, I'm just going to trail off. Like, that is what that is.
No, that's super real.
And I think that, you know, I mean, Eli Clare actually has some really beautiful stuff in Brilliant Imperfection in his last book, where he talks about being a ritual abuse survivor, you know, and he's like, yeah, I fucking did all the aromatherapy and the regular therapy and the take back the night and all this stuff. And he's like, I'm actually claiming being broken. He's like, I don't think I will wake up one day and it'll be like, just like all the torture I survived didn't happen. He's like, I don't think that's true. And I know he has some really beautiful writing where he's like, it was coming from a Crip, disabled, queer, and trans space, you know, where he was like, yeah, like, what does it mean to claim brokenness? What does it mean? And, you know, Blythe Barneau, who's a white working class, like, cis femme, fat preacher, you know, after, bless her soul, like, Amanda Arkansas Harris passed 2 years, wow, God, 2 years ago. In her memorial, you know, which Blythe led, Blythe talked about the Japanese practice of kintsugi, which I may be mispronouncing, but where instead of throwing away broken pottery or other practices, you put them back together with gold. And she was like, I think that's a femme survivorhood practice. I think that can be an other gendered survivorhood practice. What does it mean? And she didn't say it, but to me, that's a disabled practice. Like, and I also think that sometimes our scars aren't lined with gold. They're just scars. But what does it mean to just be with them and try not to hate them all the time? And I don't know, I just came up with this, like, weird unified theory in the bathtub, you know, like, not that long ago. And, like, I don't know, but I'm just like, I'm interested in, like, what are the possibilities for survivor futures that go away from let's fix it, you know? And it actually does remind me of, you know, Christos, who, God, you know, like, such a turf, you know, like, I'm just like, can you just fucking not be fucked up that way? But, you know, as a young survivor, when she was writing about being an Indigenous, you know, like, femme survivor, like, she had this one piece she wrote where she was like, I don't want to, like, you know, a nice little certificate or a pill. I want a circle of survivors to just grieve and howl and mourn for days and days and days, as long as it takes. And that really stuck with me. And, you know, taking away, the bullshit parts of her politics, which I can't support, which I'm very disappointed in, I'm like, I want, like, the non-trans misogynist, transphobic, like, disabled, Black and brown, all gender survivor version, where we get to mourn and we get to be angry, and we can also be like, what has survivorhood taught us? Like, what are our survivorhood skills? Which we don't often get asked. You know, often we get, you know, just told, like, oh, you know, we're never told there's anything that is good or strong or learnable from our survivorhood, and that feels really connected to me in the ways in which the medical industrial complex and, like, fucked up world just says that disability is just like a tragedy, and there's nothing strong or beautiful or amazing or, you know, really needed that comes from all of the ways we're disabled.
Absolutely.
Okay, that was a lot, but I hope that made sense.
It did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
Cool.
I think that this has been such a particular set of years, right? Because, like, as a disabled person in the Me Too era, generation, whatever way we want to talk about this passage of time, like, there just could not be one, right? Like, growing up as an autistic child, I could mark my days by how many times I was molested, you know? Like, there's just not going to be a time where I can talk about a singular instance of abuse that happened. It is not finite, it is infinite. And because of that, I think that there is a way that we had to compartmentalize to people whose stories were in fact finite, right? Like, where it's like, here's the thing that happened. It had a start, a middle, and an end. It's over now. It happened some other time, and thus we can reckon with the idea of its temporality, right? Like disabled time, Crip time is not non-disabled time, right? Like you expect people not to show up. People who like said until the very moment, like I'm on my way, right? But they were not on their way, right? They were on their way in their hearts. And that is one of the ways to travel to us, but it is only one of the ways, right? And it is understanding that your friend might call in and you will have a good conversation, right? To your party or your event. It is definitely about making space for someone who got suddenly sick at your party and is now staying over, right? And I think that temporality doesn't just stop at the event, at the party, at the gathering, right? It goes throughout our entire lives and changes, I think, many disabled people's idea of normalcy. I'm interested to, as to multiply disabled people, right? Ambulatory, certainly. And just thinking about like the ways in which, do you ever feel like you're forced to like choose or prioritize one of your disabilities over your other disabilities, or like some parts of your disability experience over other parts of your disability experience? And how do you deal with that?
Yeah, good question. Short answer, yes, probably. I mean, and then the longer answer, like, yeah, all the time. But it's also like, it's kind of like that Crip time thing too, where I'm like, you know, one of our skills is we bend time. We're time travelers. Slow time is so huge. You know, speed time is so fast. And then I'm in those moments where like, you know, we're both always all of who we are. You know, I feel like I've kind of veered between people being like, you're the exception, you're not really disabled, I'm going to ignore everything you say, you're there on a stage, so you can't be disabled, you know, and just people being like, you know, and I think it's interesting because I think talking about like, I'm really interested, I was talking with Alice Shepard about this at the Disability Intersectionality Summit about like disabled aesthetics and disabled Black and brown aesthetics and what it means to turn away from like trying to be included and really just be like, what are all the ways we do this stuff? And we were both talking about, I was like, yeah, you know, in my 30s, like my 20s, I was just like, you know, like sleeping 18 hours a day, cleaning floors, like whatever, you know, landscaping, struggling, you know, really being in a lot of trauma. And then my 30s, I kind of, you know, moved to California and quit smoking. And like, you know, I kind of had an upswing and I had more Crip community. And I had one, you know, really close disabled poor friend who had a similar chronic illness to me. And he was like, yeah, so you can't really do a 9 to 5 because you'll get pneumonia and you'll go nuts. But what you do is, you know, you've got good days and bad days. So just do gigs and you can really go hard on the good days and you crash afterwards. Now, like, and I really went for that. Like, I look at my Google calendars and I'm like, Jesus fucking Christ. And you know, I mean, so many people were like, but that's how I got social capital after a disabled 20s and a crazy 20s and an autistic 20s, though I didn't know I was autistic, where I had very little social capital in a lot of ways. And I went really fucking hard. And also I was like, I don't know how long I've got this. So sure. So now I'm in my 40s and like I'm more of a shut-in. I, you know, really thought about not getting on the plane for this tour because I was like, I got my bed and my cats. You know, that's all I need. I really don't want to leave my bed and my cats. So long story short, like I feel like, you know, it depends, but I feel like, you know, some ables will be like, okay, the cane. So you've got that thing. You've got some kind of pain thing. You've got some kind of illness thing. You take these pills. But then, you know, the autism thing, like, you know, and like there's so many ways to be autistic. There's so many ways to be read as autistic. But, you know, people are just like, you know, like they're just still in the like, you can't possibly be da-da-da-da. And I think that for a lot of people who have, you know, are in the similar autism ocean of like, I can talk a lot sometimes, you know, like we get put in that place where it's like all the times that I have mutism and I can't talk and I really need to be alone, just get erased, right? And I do think that people are like, we can deal with one thing, you know, like barely. We can't even really deal with the one thing, but like, you know, the multiverse, like, no, we're not going to do that. And
it's a post-institutional model.
It's a post-institutional model of like, you know, just like the one piece of the Trivial Pursuit thing, you know, the little corner. And that's it. But mostly I feel like either people are well-meaning or they erase most or all of it, to be honest, when it's not within our communities.
Yeah, I think that people are really comfortable with an idea of an autistic savant. And then like when they meet autistic people who are like smart or like who they think of as like smart or like who they feel like model intelligence in the way that allistic people do, like then that is cause for you not to be autistic. Meanwhile, I feel like not only was I diagnosed as a child, which people use as a benchmark, like I had to do ABA. Like people like legitimately like where like you gonna be as holistic as you can be or else. And if those things are effective and then you can like ape an idea of able-bodied normalcy, then like you are then not accommodated, right? And so that's why I say that it's a post-institutional model, right? The idea that all disabled people should be in institutions, and if you are not in an institution, you have escaped that model, and thus you are not disabled.
You're just like me, so you don't need anything, so it's fine. And like, I had this experience where I ran into somebody the other day when I was in Western Mass who had done some really like fuckery like 8 years ago, like ableist fuckery. And like, I didn't know they'd moved to Northampton, but there they were. And I have my like, you know, double huge baggies of all of my pills, you know? And then they're all like, oh, you're so good. I always forget to take my supplements. And I just looked at them and I was just like real beady eyed. And I was like, I have a lifelong disability. This is what I take to walk. It's 8 of them every day. And they were just like, oh yeah, blah, 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 blah. And I was just like, okay, you know, it's just like the willful refusal also. And I was just like, and it's, you know, there's like, you know, I get stuck on things. So like there's like the piece of disability justice performance art that really brought me in was the opening to Sins Invalid 2009, where, you know, it's Maori wheelchair dancer Rodney Bell being, some of you may have seen it, like being like suspended like 40 feet above the stage as a cross is projected on him, as Patty is saying like, you know, is this safe? Are you safe? Are you so afraid of us, the deviant, the disabled, the dissident? You know, are you so afraid you might be stained by our leaking needs? Is that why you lock us up? Is that why you try and kill us even before birth? And I was just like, and I mean, this is in the book too, but like shout out to Patty, where I was like, how come you don't do a workshop? And she's like, yeah, I could do that, or I could just make performance art that fucks people up in 3 minutes, and that's a disabled way of doing art. And it worked for me. But I was also like, yeah, you know, some people will stay afraid even after they become disabled. They will stay afraid and unwilling. They will be disabled and not use the word disability, or they will stay abled and they will just not be able to witness you forever. You know, I could put a neon fucking sign on my forehead. It wouldn't make a difference.
It's true. Carolyn Lazard and I have been talking a lot about that recently, especially in the Black community, right? Like where like there is a reluctance to call oneself disabled, even in the face of just obvious disability. And I think that a lot of that too is like coming like after enslavement and like the penalty for being disabled and no longer being valuable as a product. As no longer being having a use value that is legible for the people who benefit from your capital or from your labor, rather. And I think that is really cultural, right? Like I was, even to this day, I'm like encouraged, even by the disabled people in my life, to like identify as non-disabled. Yeah. And I'm like, how are we gonna work that out? You know, like how am I gonna be like, yeah, I have lupus, but that's a kind of health. You know, like it's just not. It's not reality, you know? Like there's like I feel like if I didn't lean into sickness when I did, I would have died. Right. And looking at my mother, who, although we are estranged, had 7 strokes a couple of years ago, and like watching her not identify as disabled, and my grandmother and I, who is also disabled, like trying to talk to her about like, why don't you identify as disabled? You are now on permanent disability. So the state says you're disabled and you know, and my mother says to me, I'm vain. You know, like that, like she looked at me and she said, I'm vain, right? And like, look, I'm vain too, you know? Like, I love my vanity. Yeah. I value it. It keeps me alive every day, right? But like, when does the idea that disability is inherently ugliness and lack, which I also feel like there's nothing wrong with being ugly and there's nothing wrong with not having something, right? But the idea that it is inherently so, like how that cheats people out of happier, more connected lives.
Right. And like thank you for naming that. And like that's something that like I've been thinking about a lot and I've written about in the book, where I'm just like, okay, because like sometimes I'm like, okay, there's all of these lines, and I feel like sometimes with like Black and brown folks in my life who I'm like, you know, I'm like, let me try and gently bring you in, you know, and I'll just be like, I won't say the D word. I'll be like, you know, stuff, like your stuff, like you want to sit down, we could sit down. You want to, yeah, no, I have Advil. I have a lot of Advil. I have other stuff too. Like I just, you know, and there's a way where I'm just like, okay, you know, because of enslavement, colonization, all of the things, it's not been safe, so fine. But then there's a line where I'm just like, and also, I mean, there's a lot of writing out there now, and there's writing the book about, like, yeah, so, look at Gloria Anzaldúa, June Jordan, Audre Lorde, like, the greatest hits of, like, not the greatest hits, but, like, a lot of, like, leadership in second wave Black and brown feminism, all of whom are living with disabilities and chronic illnesses, and many of whom, like, they're writing disability, they have different relationships to it, but you look at Gloria Anzaldúa, and she was like, that last piece where she's like, I don't identify as disabled, why are you reading me in disability studies? It's a limiting identity, and I'm like, oh, but being a tortolera is not a limiting identity? Like, what? But then Aurora was like, look, I was around for all of this, and like there was no point to joining the disability rights movement. It was all white people much of the time.
Yes.
And like it was not in this like deep feminist of color queerness vortex they were in. And I'm like, I get that.
Yeah.
And one thing that I think is also like when people were like, where is the movement? Where do you join? I'm like, honestly, it's just a bunch of weirdos on the internet and, in our, neighborhoods and so forth. But I'm like, I think that there's more media out there that has made it so that people are like, oh, like that, so that Black and brown queer and trans people can be like, oh, disability isn't just like the D word that sucks, and it might look like me or my cousin, and I might get something out of joining this. So that's cool. But then there's also still like, I don't know. I mean, there's a piece in there that I wrote for Truth Out, and I was really hoping. I was like, I had a lot of stuff where I was like, just like able people of color, just get it the fuck together. Like time's up. You're already disabled. You're gonna get disabled real soon. We're all gonna be disabled. Just do it. And then I was like, oh yeah, this is gonna blow up on the internet. No, it's all disabled people who repost it. Nary a fucking able-bodied, BIPOC activist, maybe 3. Or they're like, nice article. And then I see them just continue to do everything in the most able way possible. And I'm just, and then I talk to my elders, and they're like, oh, you think you're tired of it, 43-year-old? Wait till you're my age, and you're still doing so. Do you have an access statement? Do you have a bathroom? Do you have anything? And I don't know. I mean, I'm hoping that we will be the future, and that we will continue. That there'll just be like more and more people who are claiming intersectional disability and organizing from that place and doing it. But I also am just like, okay, like there's a lot of able-bodied leadership, BIPOC leadership, social justice leadership that just has the head right up the ass and just staying right there. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I like my cats a lot and my partner, and that's great. And I'm just really hoping for a future to work out. But I don't know. We do what we can.
But let's talk about it though, because what gets me to, and I am a former chapter leader of Black Lives Matter, and I just want to talk about these selective misreadings of Audre Lorde. It's deep. Like, people be reading the cancer journals in a burst of light and coming out like, yeah, self-care, I'm going to take a bubble bath today. Audre Lorde has that quote.
Was like, stop the fucking nuclear power plant that I worked in, or the chemical plant at Stanford. Sorry.
But additionally, like, the part about self-care that people quote comes at the very end of the book when Audre Lorde has already traveled around the world with cancer and is tired as fuck. And it was like, damn, I guess I should have prioritized myself. I feel like shit because without disability justice as a framework, I have been unable to articulate the fact that I am actually different from the feminists I have organized and now gone to South Africa with illness, and to the Caribbean with cancer,
with the cancer.
And like, it is like, I feel like, for, a lot of Audre Lorde's politics would not stand today, or would be very complicated today, right? Like, her writing on S&M is complicated. Her writing on a lot of things is very complicated. And our ancestors are complicated, right? Like, I don't need to defend the ancestors. They did their work.
Her and her partner and their 3 best friends all went to the same therapist, and they all had sex with each other. Maybe that would happen today, but it's not really it would happen today. But anyway, here we are.
And then when we look at the first memoirs that are coming out about Black Lives Matter that capitalize on disability, meanwhile, Black Lives Matter has rejected disabled people at every turn. Let me tell you, not only did SINS meet with Black Lives Matter, right, and were rejected, the Harriet Tubman Collective formed because of rejection of Black Lives Matter as an institution, right? Do not let people fool you that we have not consistently attempted to work with established movement leaders to get a disability justice framework into Black Lives Matter. They have rejected it at every turn. So the idea that like we're gonna like convince these like able-bodied identified, right, even if they are not able-bodied, and it's likely that they are not, right? That like somehow like disability justice is important for them, the optics are not right? Our movements are still very much determined about who looks the best and who has the prettiest philosophy, right? Like, it is not actually about who is the best leader.
And who can get on 45 planes.
Right, and disabled people will not be a part of that paradigm, right? Like, people say they want disabled leadership, but they're not ready to look at disabled leadership they are not ready to accept disabled leadership. And unless we can prepare people to accept a leadership that is not just based on a system of aesthetics and things that sound nice and some degrees, then we're not going to be able to meaningfully include disabled people and disability justice in our movements. We're just not.
Thank you. Yeah, and I mean, yes to all that. Thank you for naming that history, because like there's just a lot of elephants in the room at this point. And I'm just like, okay, so what now? Like, I mean, and they're not just gonna stay in the corner until we all drop dead. I mean, like, maybe that could happen. I would like that not to happen. Yeah, I don't know. And that is one thing where I'm like, I do not have the answer of the abled head up the ass problem of, we just want to have some pretty people on speed represent everybody, because it's very popular. It's very, very fucking popular. I mean, so I got asked to write a piece for Self magazine, which is not in the book, which was a really amazing and weird experience where I was just like, I'm just gonna, go for it. And wow, they pay money, more money than my Condé Nast, But I just wrote, I wrote like me, and I was like, can I swear? And they were like, yeah. And I was like, well, maybe not that much. But like, I tried to be like, this is kind of like another side of it, but they were just like, I was trying to be like, well, as more people become sick and disabled, as the climate heats up and we all go to hell, and they were like, we don't really see the relationship between, like, you're talking about the environment and like chronic illness and like being differently able, and I was like, okay. No, and my friend was like, it's Self fucking magazine, anything you say is going to be good, just try and do your best. And I was like, no, I am, like, my friend Cyrus Marcus Ware, hi Cyrus, is a black disabled trans like futurist and artist, was just like, is doing all this stuff around like, the future where the water is toxic and the only place you can live is Antarctica and everybody's sick. And I'm kind of like, well, at that point, maybe that's when DJ's really going to kick in, when we have no other fucking choice, when we have no other motherfucking choice. But I would really like to still maybe reverse the carbon stuff and not have where I live be set on fire if possible, and the places that I'm originally from to be flooded or irradiated. So, anyway, that's just my pitch for that.
We're both from places that are already kind of there, though.
Well, yeah, I had an ex who was problematic in a lot of ways, but she smoked a pack a day, and she was like, all those people who say you got to eat organic broccoli? No, man, I'm from a steel mining town, and I smoke this, so when the nuclear bombs come, I'm going to be the one that survives. And I'm like, I'm not sure if it works that way biologically, but, there is a way where I'm like, Worcester has lead, and that's about it. Like, we don't even have a Starbucks yet. It's 2018,
Right.
And it still has not, it's interesting because it still has not gentrified because it's too toxic, right?
Right.
And it's not romantic. People still, the reason why there's people are like, oh yeah, there's a lot of medical jobs in Worcester. I'm like, no shit, But there's a lot of lead, there's a lot of toxicity, there's a lot of post-industrial everything. And I think resilience is a word that I feel very over and complicated about, but like on a good day and a good moment, I'm like, there are ways in which that those of us who are surviving and limping along through toxicity have some stuff, like you and me.
Absolutely.
It's got away.
Right. Yeah. And I think that, especially being from New Jersey in particular and living in New York, New Yorkers have a story about themselves that's not true, right? Y'all export your trash and you dump it on your neighbors, right? And New Jersey is one of your neighbors. And like, so the idea that like, New York is a place where people, like there are only pull factors to New York and no push factors that like push people out of the places that they're from into New York is just a New Yorker's fallacy. Growing up, I had a best friend, and by, before we're even 30, I have lupus and she has cancer, right? So where did it come from? Like, that's not normal. Like, that's not a way that people are being asked to live their lives in the most wealthy communities in America, right? That is not... people are not exporting their trash into Manhattan, right? There is a reason why they are New York is exporting its trash to Jersey City, to Kentucky, to Pennsylvania, right? It's because those are places with less social capital. And I think that unless New Yorkers, and also just all people who live in places where they can have the environmental toxins that they produce move somewhere else, need to be real about why people come to the places that are not polluted by things like that, right? And what our water is like, and how our water mains break, and how we are flooding, right? Like, I feel like there's a way that people who live in cities, specifically in cities, live in a bubble about what the environment is already doing. There are already climate refugees now, right?
Yeah,
people are already getting sick from these toxins that are being dumped from cities or the needs of cities into our water, into our land. So
Right, and quick.
Where are we going?
Right,
Like, what are we gonna do?
And quick pitch, and then maybe we want to like do one more question, then open it up because y'all are a beautiful and very engaged looking audience. But that you might need to pee like real soon, or do whatever you need to do. But one thing that I wrote about. So I live on the West Coast now, and we've had wildfire. I mean, we've had wildfires for a while, but like the last few years have been these like. I had to leave my writer's residency because the car fire popped up and there was no electricity. And I was just like, oh, and my friend's texting me on like one bar being like, girl, you need to get the fuck out of here. It's into purple. And these able people were like, oh, we're going to go swim in the river. Do you have a problem? And I'm like, I have a problem. I have to drive 12 hours through like, the end times basically. So there's this kind of nexus of like impairment and hardness and also disabled skill where in 2017 when there was like the BC wildfires, the Columbia Gorge wildfires, the Santa Rosa wildfires, the LA wildfires, it was like in Seattle, like and this is just a summation of some stuff that's already in there. There were a lot of people on social media who were like, wait, am I crazy? Like I'm feeling kind of like dizzy. Like does that have anything to do with the fire? I don't know. No, they're saying it's fine. They're saying it'll be over tomorrow. Wait, I can't really breathe. Like wait, I'm feeling anxious. And then it was everybody who I knew in Seattle who has chemical injury, who has asthma, who has environmental illness, who has autoimmune disorders, who was like, I'm gonna introduce you to my HEPA filter. I already have a box of masks. Like I can tell you where to get a mask. I can tell you what tinctures and what activated charcoal you can take to get this out of your body. Yes, you're feeling anxious because there's not enough oxygen. Yes, you're feeling sick because it's all the stuff they used to put out the fires and also it's trees, but it's also like houses and farm chemicals and like exploding cars, and we're breathing it all. And we were the ones who had those skills. And then in the Bay Area, there's a collective called Lightning Bolt that's like a disabled and fat, like multiracial like collective that started after Trump to be like, let's talk about community safety, that has done a lot of disability justice work. And they had this Masks to the People action where they were like, okay, we're going to raise money so we can like buy a shit ton of masks and go to like tent cities and houseless encampments because people don't have walls are really getting it. And we're going to hand out P95s and we're going to get that out there. And that was something where I was like, these are skills we have, and these are ways that like it's not perfect because like $800 only goes so far, but I'm just like, they need us, like not the houseless people, but the able people need us and our skills. Like we actually know how to like work and organize through impairment and through disaster. And as my friend Naima Lowe once said, we have already survived the end of the world. So there you go, multiple times. Sometimes, some of us haven't. Some of us haven't. Some of us have.
That feels like a good place to open up for questions. Yeah.
Think? What happened? Oh, microphone. I was like, the live stream died. That's what happened. Yeah. Hello, cute and attentive audience. Please say, I know Q&A is just like, I just want to go home and feel things. But, we have this one night, and the subway's going to be fucked up. So we might as well say things, ask questions, disagree, etc.
Hi. So I loved what y'all were saying about turning away from. Whoop! I'm trying to juggle too many things. Yes, please. Thank you. Practicing liberation here. About turning away from really inclusion and towards each other. And I've been thinking a lot about that, and I think honestly, like one of the things that's been really rough for me, at least in New York, is that I know a lot of folks really love social media and the Crip spaces there, and I find them sometimes just just social media in general, like too much and way not enough. And I've found that like I don't think I'm the only person who feels this way. I know that perhaps folks with other sort of conglomerations and constellations of disability, particularly like autism you're speaking of, might feel differently about this than I do. But, even just the fact that under patriarchy and capitalism, touch is relegated to sexuality almost exclusively. And I think that one of the things that I'm trying to move towards, and I don't know how it's going to happen, but is really Crip Justice collective living and actually like living together in the New York area. And it's a tough thing, but I just wanted to hear thoughts about the materiality of like being with other disabled bodies and like loving each other in that way.
You want to go? Should I
I
go?
just have a quick thing to say. And the only thing I have to say is that like collective housing is like a really wonderful paradigm, and we have to completely revise the way that we do it, right? Like I think that there is a way that when we think of disability, we think of a very small frame of like what disabling things would be. But like for instance, I've lived in collective housing literally my whole life because I come from a family that practices mass living. But I think about how like radical queer and trans housing places I've lived in with like people who identified as prison abolitionists who would never allow someone who was formerly incarcerated to live there, you know, or who would never, you know, accommodate someone who is disabled because it had a million steps. And so I think that like we have to think really critically about like who is a collective housing situation for, who are housing for justice, like who is it for, and like where do our intersections lie before we can do those things well.
Boom. What Cyree said, and also, yeah, I want to say like I am somebody who both, I think we're kind of coming to the end of social media maybe finally. I just feel like, I mean, I don't know, like I'm still on Instagram, you know, am I ever? But you know, pictures are cool. I just like, I think it's actually an interesting moment in like Crip history because I feel like there was a wave of DJ organizing where we really came together. Billy Rain, you know, my friend and comrades created Second Disabled Queers in 2008, and that place was a real hot spot. And it was this thing of like, we're all in bed, we're all isolated, we can come together. And then between like the trolls and the Russians and the fascists and the bots and like just the complete overstim, it's like boom, you know. And I mean, there's a lot of communities that I was really an active member of that are very not what they once were, and that is what it is. Like it's not so accessible for me either, you know. And then yeah, I think that what you say is so important, and being able to be touched, being able, if we to have community in real time is so important. And I think that's like post institutionalization too, around like, and it's somewhere in the netherworld between independent living and interdependence, you know? And I think like someplace where I've seen a lot of people get stuck is I've heard I've had this dream, and I've heard a lot of people say the dream of like, we're gonna go to the city, and I'm not saying this is what you're saying, but I feel like we're kind of reaching for that, like it's gonna be an interdependent, sick and disabled collective house. We're gonna get a building, we're gonna do this stuff. And then the reality is often like impossible or more complicated, and I think that's where we get stuck a lot, is if like, you know, I know so many STQ folks in New York who are just like completely inaccessible city, like fuck, you know, so then it's like, well, if we can't get the place without stairs, maybe we can't do anything. And I guess I just want to kind of like encourage us and like lift up the ways in which like it doesn't have to be like the collective, like just future Section 8, like fully accessible development to count. Because I think for me, like, you know, and I live in Seattle, which is inaccessible, but it's a newer city. So there are some things where like, you know, the subway's accessible. It has 6 stops. So that's, my partner's from Queens. My partner's like, this is not a fucking subway, and this is not Jackson Heights. And I'm like, we know it's not Jackson Heights. But it's been interesting for me because I feel like, for me personally, like I feel like I went from like being like really on social media a lot and like really being embedded in different online communities, so really pulling back the last couple years, and I have like 10 to 15 local friends who we see each other, like we figured out, okay, we have one accessible house this way, and then we have one chemically accessible house, and then we have this rec room in like the low income development that Central Terraza made that's wheelchair accessible. And you know, it's not always all of us, but it's more of us, and it's like, you know, it's like, and it's kind of like fumbling our way towards it and kind of giving up on the idea of the utopia to be like, how can we be in the along, as you know, Gwendolyn Brooks said, you know, like how can we be, you know, 2 or 3 of us coming together, you know. And I don't know, like I want to try and be in that place of curiosity about what's possible, because I think also I feel like it's a real disabled thing where we have so much built up isolation and deep need that we fall on each other and then it blows up, you know. And I want us to make more room to like honor that need and also be like, let's do a small thing and then another small thing and another small thing. And then also like look at, you know, what are the big, like bigger than just us collective possibilities of mutual aid, because I'm just like, one house is something, but it's not enough. I mean, I think this may be going a little further afield, but like I mean, disability justice has been beating the interdependence drum for a really long time, and that's in a real way. And I think also what I tried to write about is like interdependence is not a magic unicorn. It's complicated. And, you know, for me, I'm just like, I actually kind of want to live by myself. Like, that's some of my access need. I want to have people around me, but I'm like, I live with my partner. We have so much space, but like they moved to 60 miles south for this quarter. And I'm like, you know, I really love not talking to anybody most of the time. And they're like, I miss you, but we don't have to fight over those plastic bags. And like, and my like overstim is not there, you know, and I'm not feeling guilty because I love my partner, but they're there all the fucking time. And oh, one last thing. I'm sorry, this is a lot for one question, and I want to open it up. But like, I just want to say that like, you know, I had a friend who was just asking me a question where she was like, "You date another sick and disabled femme of color. Like, what is that like? Like, I still really have to compartmentalize my disability away from my sexuality, you know." And I was just like, and the first thing I thought of was, I'm like, me and my partner talk about our poop to each other, and that's not for everybody. But I'm just like, I've come to this place where I'm like. And it's not always a straight shot, but I'm like, I want to be there in all of my body. I want them to see the gross parts. Like, I don't want to have to just like, you know, present the most able side of myself on a date and then go home and hide the rest of it. And it's been really messy and hard. And that's what I want to say is that it's beautiful and it's messy and it's hard. Like, it's really real when we're just like, oh, you're going to see that? You're going to see that part of me? Oh my God. You know, I mean, I figured out I was another midlife person who figured out she was autistic 2 years ago, like that paradigm. And I was just like, you're going to leave me, you know, you're right there. I can't hide it anymore. And they might have, like, there's no guarantees. Like, that's the thing. Like, often, even with solidarity, we don't have guarantees. I'm going to stop talking now. Thank you for your question.
Hi, thanks so much for all of this. This has been such like a rejuvenating night of just being among people, and everyone with like everyone here in this room who has a disability, whether you know we can see it or not. Like I just want to say I see you. We all see you. We all see each other, and I love that you brought up
Poop?
Gwendolyn Brooks because.
Great, okay.
Gwendolyn Brooks, because like
much better.
Like Paul Robeson, we are each other's harvest. We are each other's business. Mm-hmm. And like I just wanted to tie that back to like Lucille Clifton's like, won't you celebrate with me? Like won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into this kind of life? Like born non-white and non-woman into Babylon, etc. And
I have had no models.
Exactly, yes. I have had no models, and then come celebrate with like. Won't you celebrate with me? Like,
that every day
something has tried to kill me and has failed. So let's have a fucking party. Let's have a fucking party about disability. Let's like take joy in our disability. Let's sit comfortably in our uncomfortable likeness. I guess in terms of like framing a question then. Because this is a Q&A, right? So sometimes you gotta follow the format. I guess we've thrown the word around. We've thrown the phrase Crip time around a lot, and you know we can trace back its origins to even before Robert McClure wrote you know Crip theory and introduced the idea. But I think. You know, we can have a general idea of what Crip time means to us as a community, but I think we can also have personal ideas of what Crip time is. And I was just wondering, like, and I was just curious as to what Crip time means to you on a more personal and intimate level.
This is a good one. You want to do it? You want to start? You want me to start?
We're so generous, Leah.
We're on it. This is the Cyree and Leah show.
Okay.
Yeah, this could be like a 9 million podcast idea that never happens, but that everyone, you know what I mean? Like,
I'm sure I've actually pitched this podcast to you. So I've like very recently been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, which is like no surprise to me at all, right? Like, oh yeah, like totally.
Yeah.
You mean I was abused for long enough that my PTSD turned into something else? Tell me more about it. So like, yeah, like I've like in the last year I was diagnosed with borderline and I was like, oh, that makes good sense. Like I actually do have that. But for me, borderline means that every day I wake up and I'm 6. Just like every day. And then like I have to spend some moments being 6 again.
Yeah.
And like feeling that dread and that pain and that vulnerability. And for me, that is the foundation of Crip time. Like, yeah, it takes me a long time to get places. I'm there like a year early because I was afraid of being late and I had anxiety dreams. But I think for the most part, for me right this second, like crippled time means that like sometimes I don't realize I'm not I'm doing something for other people and I don't notice until a year later, and then I have to like completely revise my life in ways that are really embarrassing. Or like I see someone who has nothing to do with anything and now it's 3 years ago, right? Like that's Crip time for me. And I think that particularly my mental illnesses are constantly rocketing me back and forth through time. Like it's just like there is not a standard idea of where I am in my life. You know, like one day I'm 55 and the next day I am 17. And that's just where I'm at.
Yeah, I guess it's been kind of a red letter year for both of us where I'm like, well, I figured out I had I was on the disassociation spectrum this year, which I mean, again, I knew, but I just been like, every May I freak out and then I just like overwork about it and then I forget about it for another 9 months. Then it comes back and I'm like, oh God, this is horrible. And then finally I was just like my therapist's like, why don't we, she's really weird and great. She's like, are you familiar with hothead paysan, homicidal lesbian terrorist? And I was like, yes, Vanessa, I am. And she's like, well, you remember how, her idea of God is lampy? It's like a gooseneck lamp that just shines. She's like, why don't you just shine lampy on your parts? And I was like, you are the therapist for me. This is not work for everybody. This is fucking great. So I have some similar stuff around just like time travel, and archive, and it's all right there. And it's like, it's right there in prime time, like the 6-year-old, like all the different ages, things like that. So I would second that, like, those are some of our superpowers or just our powers or just our ways of being. And then, I mean, for me, and I feel like this might be repetitive because it kind of lines up with, well, no, I mean, I'll say like it lines up with like a lot of the ways Crip time gets talked about where I'm just like, yeah, I came here on a scholarship and then, I'd done some angel dust by accident. So I was hallucinating the whole first year. And then, my girlfriend was suicidal. My mom was dying, it was not a picnic. And I was also undiagnosed autistic, like no structure, no food, lots of cigarettes up till 6 a.m., it didn't all work out. And then I was really depressed, and then I got really sick with the chronic fatigue and the fibro. And so there I was in Toronto after a brief period of jubilation, just 16 hours a day, 18 hours a day. Oh, wow, I'm asleep again. Wow, it took me an hour to get to the bathroom. Just an infinite amount of time and slowness and inside this room. And so some of what happened then was I did some time traveling. Like I was having some real, seriously mentally interesting experiences where I was dreaming of my grandma and being like, is what I'm remembering about the abuse true? And she was like, yeah. And then threw me down in the bed. And I was just like, okay, yep. And also I have more energy now often, but it's also just periodic where I'm like, okay, yep, I don't have names for them yet in words, but I have names for that moment where I can tell I'm about to get this kind of sick. That where I'm just I have to just it doesn't look that bad. It looks like a trickle, but I got to get in bed right now. All hands on deck, all chicken soup on deck, all, community acupuncture on deck. Or just well, this is the week where I will just be sleeping or things like that. And where I probably should come up with names for those spaces and where, the thing I go back to is when you're slow, it gets looked down on in traditional activism, but slowness means you notice stuff that otherwise all these speedy, really efficient motherfuckers just whiz on by, you're like, oh, well, what about that? Oh, well, we're all going to die if you do that because I see this hole in the thing over there. And so, I think a lot, I think Alison Kepfer actually had stuff in, Feminist Queer Crip where she talked about, slow time and time traveling and being, a very old person while being young, where I'm just yeah, I relate to that. I relate to that a lot. And I don't know, and I kind of want to bring in, it makes me curious about, if we could name specific Black and brown Sikh and Crip times, right? Like I think about my dad, like something I say a lot is I'm like, well, most of Sri Lanka is disabled. I mean, physically for sure, but also we all have complex PTSD. We had a 30-year civil war and 15 different varieties of colonization. And, my father, like there's some, I don't know how they came up with this, but they were like, Sri Lanka was voted the #1 country in the world for alcoholism for 5 years running. It's like we had and I was like, right, because everyone drinks to deal. Like everyone really, a lot of countries drink to deal, and it's a coping mechanism and it can be positive and it can be not. And that's my dad. And I think about my dad's, does my dad call himself disabled? No, but he's been a brown man in a basement with a tumbler of brown liquor for 30 years, 40 years at this point, in his thoughts, in his memories, in his silence. And I'm like, that's a particular kind of Crip time I want to talk about. What world is he inhabiting in there? And maybe if we talk more about these specific kinds of Crip times, we'll have more language, we'll have more tools, we'll be able to just name this stuff and then be like, what do we do with this? What do we learn from it? How do we shape it? Yeah.
Thank you both so much. This has been really, really incredible. So my question is, when I came in here today, I was thinking of myself as an able-bodied person, and I was like, okay, I want to learn about a perspective that I don't have the experience to speak from. But then about halfway through, when you're talking about survivors, I began crying not because I'm a survivor, actually, but because I have OCD. And I just realized that some things that you were talking about, were things I could relate to from that. And then you were talking about, the idea of, we're all, there's so many, there's just a lot of ways that people are disabled that they don't recognize as disability, or they will become disabled later in life, and it got me wondering about the identity of being disabled, and sort of is there a danger of people who in many respects are able-bodied or are able-bodied now but might not be later, trying to sort of usurp that identity, or is it more important usurp it in the sense of trying to claim that they are something so that they can speak from that perspective, or is it more important that people recognize themselves as the bodies that they are, and not, it's just do we need to shift to something where we're not talking about able-bodied or disabled, but
the brain is in the body. Where does it live?
Right.
The brain, your mind, it's all contingent on your body. So I feel of two minds around the idea that able-bodied is not the opposite of disabled, right? But that is also a point that people make, right? I think that there are lots of ways to think about disability, and the one that includes a very narrow focus on your body is really only one of them.
And I also want to say, I hear what you're saying, and I think that, I'm really glad that you raised that point, because, there's so many things going on in that moment, because, okay, so, and for one thing, I think, when I get, called, I do, some of the work that I really like to do as a consultant is with, majority or all BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, POC organizations that are we want to do a training. And so what, and what I usually go into, one of the places I start with is I'm you might think that this is some issue that's out there, but what's going to happen really quickly in this workshop is you're going to realize that you're disabled, or, oh shit, your uncle's disabled, or your community, because when we talk about disability from a place that is not centering whiteness, and that is, that has a really broad understanding of disability, where it's physical, mental, cognitive, deafblind, mental health, all this stuff, people are just oh shit, and where we're yay, let's, I remember being at the Queer Student of Color Conference in 2015 and being I want to do this sick and disabled QDPOC writing workshop, and the room was full. And 3 years ago it wouldn't have been, and everyone was I want to talk about my grandma being a farm worker and pesticide exposure. I want to talk about being denied health care as Black people. I want to talk about medical experimentation as Arab folks. I want to talk about mental health. I want to talk about intergenerational trauma. And that's what comes out, And so first of all, I think there's just that reality. And then I think I hear what you're saying about the the claiming part. And what I would say is I think I mean, I'm also of a couple minds about it, at least. Well, I'm multiple, so of course I'm a couple minds about it. You can laugh, it's fine. But I don't worry about people usurping disability identity. Like, I want more people to come in and explore and try things on. I mean, once in a while, like, there's somebody who's like, I have mild asthma once a year, I guess I'm disabled. And like, I think, and I'm just like, okay, maybe be a little careful about that, friend. Or just like, think about that. But I also see so many people, in particular, like Black, Indigenous, POC people who are like, I don't know if what I have counts. And I think that's because of the ways racist ableism plays out and because of the particular ways that we've had to hide to survive, right? And I think that's true whether it's a very overt physical difference or whether it's something that's quote unquote invisibilized, or invisible. So, I mean, for me, I'm just like, yeah, like, if you're queer, you're queer. And like, well, of course, that's much more complicated. But like, I think it's a lot of like identity shit, where it's like, come on in. Like, and also, one thing I will say is like, I think that like a lot of people aren't aware that like disability is like culture, community, like history. Like, because we've been really taught that disability is just this like individual, like depoliticized health thing that you have. So I think one thing that happens a lot when people are like, oh, I'm checking out what do I identify as disabled, is like people are like, oh, wow, people have talked about this stuff before. They've been doing activism for a long time. So I mean, I guess the one thing that I'd say is like, just know that like, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, that like as you look, there's probably been people doing, organizing and activism and culture making, around your particular form of disability, like not you singling you up, but just period, for a really long time, and like sit with that. And also, I mean, it's not the end of the world if you don't. Like, I said and did some completely bullshit things when I was just like, no one's ever talked about blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, no, they really have. Because, as we've said, like we, disabled people have been talking about this for years. We get shut out. Right. So, I mean, I would just say, like, just wade in and, like, look around and explore and be curious. And, yeah. Yeah, thank you. Hello. Is it time to stop? It's time to stop. Thank you, Cyree.
Thank you, Leah.
Thank you,
And her
audience.
care work.
Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you, Sophia. Thank you, everybody. What were you going to say?
Hooray, care work.
What?
Hooray for care work.
Hooray for care work. Which you just said is, who said, you said it was #1 in gay and lesbian?
In lesbian studies
In
specific.
lesbians. Oh, I'm such a ha 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 ha.
They separate those things for some reason.
It's like how I won for lesbian poetry, and I'm like, it's not really lesbian poetry, Lambda, but okay, you do you.
All right.
Yeah, whatever it is.
Get your trophies.
Yeah. I mean, I was driving a $100 car over the Bay Bridge, and someone was like, "You won," and I almost crashed into the Prius in front of me, and I was like, "Oh," and then but yeah, we're gonna hang out for a bit. We can talk. We can have conversation. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm sorry it sold out. My pitch is, if you have to get it from Amazon, great. But like Powell's, Arsenal Pulp, IndieBound will like lead you to like any, like the closest bookstore to you that will order it. I just say that because Amazon is a disability justice issue, because people are dropping dead and being disabled by the horrible working conditions on the floor and the prison labor, which is also a disability justice issue. And we can end those motherfuckers. And I'm really angry about what they're doing to where I live in Seattle, where it is impossible for working class disabled people to stay in the fucking city. So that's my pitch. But like, yeah, buy the book, ask your library to get it, ask all the libraries to get it, and write your own books, please, and do your own thing. And thank you so much for having us. This is so great.